Hi guys, hope you're well. Welcome to another video and welcome to the channel. If you are new to the channel, please do consider a sub. Always helps get the channel out there in front of more people who might need a bit of help as well. And what is the topic for this video? Well, where am I this week? I'm in my garage, or garage as you might say, over the pond. And what is this here? Well, this is the bonnet or the hood for my Renault 5 GT Turbo. For those of you that do follow the channel, you know I have one of these. It's this car right here. Recently got through its MOT. Unfortunately, it failed this time round on the brake lines. They'd flagged up previously as being a little corroded, and this time it was a fail, so they needed replaced. But there is another problem with this car right now. It is running, or not running kind of like an absolute pig right now. It will only hold revs with the choke on. When it's warmed up and you lose the choke, it dies completely. It won't hold idle. Lots of blue smoke coming out the back. It's got ignition, it's got fuel okay. The problem is with the carb. Now, hand on heart, I probably haven't been using this car enough, to be fair, and the fuel that is in there has gotten pretty old. I think it's gunked up the carb, probably varnished the carb a little bit. And really, it's never run quite right since I got the car way back in, I think, 2016 now. And why is that? Well, really, the carb needs to be completely refurbed. It is very important to ensure that the carb is clean, free of debris, and can get fuel and air into the car properly. At the moment, that's not happening. Also, the accelerator jet, the enrichment jet, has never worked properly. So that if you're driving along, holding a constant, say 3,000 RPM or something, and you put your foot down, it hesitates. So that's never worked. That needs to be fixed. It's probably the diaphragm that's failed there as well. So I am not comfortable doing it myself. There are videos, there are how-tos, there's instructions, but the thing is, if something was actually wrong with the carb, I wouldn't necessarily know. So it makes sense to get it to a man who is in the know so they can refurb it completely. Complete rebuild and clean of that carb. That man is a man called Mark Branston. I'll put his details in the description if you want to reach out to him for any help with your carb that you might want to send off to him for a refurb. It should come back looking like new. So I'm not going to do the refurb, but what I do need to do so that Mark can work his magic, so that the man can work his magic, is get the carb off. And this is something I've never done before, so it's going to be a bit of trial and error. It shouldn't be too complex. It's a case of removing a few parts. Need to get the anti-perk fan out. Also disconnect a few hoses, the fuel hose, some air bleed hoses as well, and get that elbow off the top. If I come down here a little bit, you should be able to see the engine. It should follow me down, which it has, which is great. So this here is the elbow, the air, where the air is forced in through that carb, that compressed air via the turbocharger, which sits over here. So yeah, we need to get this off. We need to get the accelerator cable off, the choke cable off, and there's a couple of bolts we need to do to get the carb off. So this could be a complete and utter disaster. It could all go very wrong, but I'm going to try the process, film it as well. It might help you out if you need to get the carb off. We could be left with a completely unusable car. Fingers crossed we won't. So let's crack on and see how we get on. Okay, so we're nicely illuminated here, and this is the elbow that we've got to get off first. Now, the first thing that you need to get off is the anti-perk fan, which I've actually already done. Let me just show you what that looks like actually. So that's the anti-perk fan there, which sits in this hole here. The anti-perk fan is kind of nestled in that hole there. The motor unit is connected to this as well. And basically the purpose of that is to blow cold air over the carb so that the car will start when it's been running for a while and it's hot. So when it's hot, lots of heat coming off here, and it causes fuel in the carb to evaporate, to percolate out, and it has problems with a hot start. I don't actually know how effective it is at doing its job, but I guess it's in there for a reason, right? But this is what we first need to get off, this elbow here. So I'm going to use a socket set to try and get this off. Other bits we need to note here. So this here is the fuel inlet for the carburetor. This is where fuel is fed in here. There's various air bleed hoses as well, which are also connected to the carb. We've got this hose here, which goes off to the turbo wastegate, which is located over here. So we'll need to get that off as well. And of course, we've got the choke cable here and the accelerator cable tucked down in there. So let's see how we go here. I won't kind of do this in real time. I'll speed this up for argument's sake. We'll see how we go and provide a bit of commentary after the fact.
So the first thing you're going to need to do is of course remove that elbow, or lobster as it's sometimes known. For that you'll need a 10mm socket set. I'm using a small comedy spanner here because access isn't great and I wanted some good feedback so that I wasn't rounding any of those nuts off. There are 3 nuts and bolts to contend with. I simply loosened them at first with the spanner and then used my fingers, my hands, to get them off because I wanted to ensure I didn't drop anything down into that engine bay, and I sometimes do that if I'm using a spanner like so, or a socket like so. There's 1 nut and bolt, or bolt and nut, whichever way you want to say, at the near side here you can see, and to the other side. Access to the third one is a little bit problematic, so you might have to fiddle around a little bit there. I should call out this is not a standard lobster elbow here. The standard one is plastic and the turbo hose tended to pop off the end. That's why this one is a metal one. Once those 3 bolts are off, you should be able to gently ease up that lobster and loosen it off a little bit there. Next thing we'll need to do is get the rest of those hoses off. Next up, we're going to just release that bleed hose there. I'd already loosened that up, and we're going to get that lobster moved over to the side. This is going to facilitate easier access to the carburetor so that we can remove it properly. Next up, I decided to remove the choke cable. I'm not sure if there's any right or wrong order in which to do this. I was simply moving around the carb, kind of making my way down as I went. That choke cable should just unclip from that stud there. It's just simply a coiled metal spring at the end. Next up, removing that air hose at the back. This was a bit fiddly. It was quite stuck on, and the more you sort of pulled, the more it kind of wedged itself in. I didn't want to split it, so it took a little bit of time to ease it off and prise it off, but we got there in the end. After that, it's time to remove the throttle cable. Very easy, you just need to loosen the tautness in it, create some slack, then you can feed that stop through the grip which it sits in, and it's done. You can do that one-handed. Then I decided to remove the clip from the choke cable there. Unfortunately, it pinged off and went to the bottom of the car, and luckily I was able to retrieve that, but don't do the same thing yourself. So actually making some pretty good progress here. Nothing was too difficult, everything coming off relatively easily. So time to tackle that fuel line. Just undo that Jubilee clip and then you can prise the fuel line off. As I say, I've not used the car for a while, so any fuel that was in it should have drained back down towards the tank via gravity. And indeed, yeah, it was pretty good in the end there. Nothing really flying out everywhere, which is of course good from a safety perspective. After this, it is time to then begin loosening the carb itself, which is attached to that inlet manifold. Only 2 nuts and bolts to deal with here, and it's a 13mm socket that you'll need for both of those. I was using a ring spanner here because it was the best to get good traction around that nut and get it off nice and easily. So just a very simple case of removing both those nuts from those 2 bolts holding that carb firmly in place. Once you've done this, the carb is free to come off, but there's a few other bits that we need to just take care of here. Also, I can't stress this enough, please again do take great care when removing the bolts that you don't drop them down the bottom of the car. Now I'm sure there's a fancier way of doing this, maybe something magnetic, etc., but I don't know it at this stage, so if you do know, please do advise. And the last little bit you'll need to take care of here, the 2 hoses connected to the carb for the water cooling, for the water jacket. Very simply a case of unscrewing 2 Jubilee clips, then those hoses should remove nice and easily. You can push those off to the side. Once you've done this second hose there, which you can see me removing, it's a little bit fiddly to get access to those Jubilee clips, but very easy to pop those hoses off and again move them to the side. That is the last part of the carb. The carb should now come off. I forgot to remove that little spring there on the throttle cable, which was again very easy just to kind of unclip, and that's it. Carb is off. I would advise then blocking up that inlet manifold there with something so that you don't drop anything down it, and then risk it being sucked into the engine at some point.
So that is it. It wasn't too bad. About 45 minutes work, I reckon. Being very careful as I went. I didn't want to drop any of the bolts down the bottom. Luckily enough, I didn't do that. One of the clips pinged off. But here we have a carb ready to be sent off, and look at the state of it. I think it looks pretty old. I had a peek inside. I don't want to tip it just in case the fuel falls out all over me, but look inside and it doesn't look too bad, but as I say, it needs an expert eye to look over it. But that is it, one Solex DIS32 carb ready to go off for a refurb. Yeah, look how grotty that is. It will come back looking like new, so I'm quite excited about this. It should be pretty good, and be able to get it back on. It really wasn't too bad, and fingers crossed the reverse process. I've blocked off the manifold, the intake there, just to prevent anything falling down in there, because if that happens, it's going to be very heartbreaking indeed. So what I am going to do is just leave this on its side overnight for the fuel to drain out the chamber, so I can get it in the post and get it sent off. Excellent, that's it for this one. I will do a follow-up video getting it back on and seeing how it works, but good luck to the man who's going to do this.